session. But if you're seeing us, you are in. And with that, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's NAC at Home program. My name is Nadine Heidinger, and I'm the Director of Communications at the National Arts Club. For those of you who are not familiar with the National Arts Club, we are a 501c3 nonprofit based in New York City with a mission to stimulate, foster, and promote public interest in the arts and to educate the American people in the fine arts. Annually, the club offers more than 150 free programs to the public, including exhibitions, musicals, lectures, and readings. For more information about the National Arts Club, please visit us at nationalartsclub.org, or you can visit us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Judith Matloff, seasoned foreign correspondent and author of a brand new book, How to Drag a Body and Other Safety Tips You Hope You Never Need, as well as award-winning journalist and author Abby Ellin. Today's program is the official book launch event for How to Drag a Body, so we invite everyone to join us for a virtual toast following the Q&A. We will also be sharing a link to purchase the book in the chat, and please feel free to use the Q&A function for any questions you might have. And with that, and any further ado, please let me pass the baton to Abby and enjoy the program.
Thank you. Thank you, Nadine and the National Arts Club and everybody for coming out and making me get dressed, and Judith, and this is wonderful. So thanks. As you probably know, we're here tonight to celebrate Judith's new book, How to Drag a Body, which when you started thinking about this book, Judith, you probably didn't expect the world to be the way it is. That would be the other safety tips you hope to never need part of the program, right? You weren't expecting it would come launching in a pandemic.
No, and what I expected was that we would have some kind of a natural disaster. Like I thought maybe there'd be a tornado in Staten Island, and then that earthquake everybody was talking about in New York would happen, and then we'd have a hurricane like 5 times worse than Sandy. I didn't expect that we'd all be locked down, stockpiling lentils and wearing masks.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because I was one of those people who had not stockpiled anything. So stockpiling lentils didn't occur to me. But your house is a stockpile. You've been planning for something forever.
Yeah, our basement is really a kind of scary place to go to because there's so much in there. And it was weird because when all this happened and the lockdown began, my husband was in Europe and I was in upstate in a writer's residency. So we didn't have time to do all that hoarding that everybody else was, getting the bales of toilet paper and, you know, the pyramids of beans. But part of the thing was we already had all that stuff. Like we actually had N95 masks in the basement, we had wipes, we had gloves, we had a ridiculous amount of food. I mean, we sort of just by habit always do that kind of thing. We always are prepared just in case. And so we didn't panic as much as we might have, because when we both finally made it to New York and all the shelves were bare, at least our shelves in the basement were pretty stocked up.
Because you were upstate, right, at the time?
Yeah, and John was in Europe, yeah.
Right. And I remember we went out early and we were distributing the N95s. Well, you distribute them to the hospital.
Yeah, I had some. I mean, we had them lying around the house anyway, and then it looked like there were people that needed them more than us. And I emailed a friend who works at the emergency department of Columbia Presbyterian. He said, even if you have 3 masks, just bring them. So Abby and I strolled uptown, we dropped them off. And who knows who actually got hold of them at the hospital. You know, the guard was looking pretty pleased.
The point is that you had them. I mean, that's what I think is so great. And that's why, you know, you of all people to have written this book, you're the perfect person to write this. And tell everybody a little bit about where you've been. A nice Jewish girl like you hanging out in Angola. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, well, precisely because I was a nice Jewish girl from Queens, I had to get out of Queens. So I became a foreign correspondent. And it wasn't like I sought to cover conflict. I mean, I actually don't enjoy that kind of thing at all. But when you're foreign correspondent, at some point you're going to be somewhere like outside Harrods and a bomb goes off, or, you know, they send you somewhere where suddenly a war starts. And that's exactly what happened to me in Angola. I had gone there to cover what was supposed to be the end of a civil war and its first democratic elections. Things didn't go as they planned to. The war started, the borders closed. I'd never covered a war before and I was stuck there. And this was my road to Damascus moment, or as Abby calls it, my road to mask moments, because I had no idea how you're supposed to cover a conflict. I was getting these death threats. All the borders were closed, so I couldn't get out. The roads were mined. And my only form of communication with the outside world was this giant satellite phone. And nobody had taught me that when there's a power surge, you need a surge protector. So my $10,000 satellite phone blew up, so I had no way to communicate with the outside world. I had this death threat going off against me. And my government didn't have diplomatic relations with Angola at the time. So there was nobody who could evacuate me because I didn't have a diplomatic mission there. And it kind of got worse and worse. And as I was going through all this, holed up in my hotel, because there was fighting outside my hotel, and the water would be periodically blown out, I'd be thinking, you know, shouldn't they be training people to do this kind of thing? Like, shouldn't they be giving people a little bit of preparation? And so that's how I began to think about how maybe we should do some safety training. And, you know, one thing led to another.
Did they didn't have anything? Because I remember reading, and then I wrote a thing about for journalists. They were offering these safety in England. I don't know if they had it in the States, but it was some project.
Not 1992.
Maybe not in 92.
Yeah, it really began far, far later in the aughts. And at which point I was getting involved. For the last 20 years, I've been teaching at Columbia University, a conflict course, and safety has always been part of that. And then I've had a consultancy on the side, training journalists all over the world, but it really began in the aughts. I actually began to start doing training in 2005. But before that, you know, when I started out, we didn't have flak jackets. You know, like your boss would give you a bottle of scotch and say, good luck, you know, I hope it goes okay. And you'd be thinking, yeah, I hope it would go well too, but like, what do I do while I'm there?
So what did you do?
Well, I did a lot of stupid things. Like I walked in the middle of a mine dump that had been bombed. And I didn't realize, I was like, oh, wow, I was with the photographer. It's like, wow, this is really cool. Look, here's a shell from Russia and here's a shell from China. And like, you know, they're all smoking around us. I mean, you know, if I'd taken the wrong step, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. And I would hear shooting and I would think, wow, you know, I should go and cover that. So I would go right towards shooting. And at one point, I heard like a gigantic, like a firefight going on. I thought, wow, I really got to check this out. Oh, it's in a courtyard. I'll get a really good view. So I was like in the middle of the courtyard and these snipers are like pointing at me and I didn't have a way out of there. So I made like a lot of really, 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 really stupid mistakes. And each time I kept thinking, you know, there really should be like smarter way to do this.
But you got out. I'm assuming you got out because we are here.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, I did this on myriad occasions. And so eventually, when I started teaching other journalists, I thought we really have to do this in a smart way. And the industry had taken a turn at that point. And so that's how I began to do the training. And each year I would add new modules and elements to it. I mean, a big thing that came in about 10 years ago was digital safety. We never thought about that before. Gender safety was something I started to do about 7 years ago. So, you know, we're constantly revising it. And a big thing that I'm doing right now is COVID-19 safety.
Well, we'll
navigate this situation.
Well, and we will get to that. But one of the things that I think is so interesting about the book is that I don't know how to, I hope you can't hear that bing, but if you can, I'm sorry. I don't know how to get it off. You made it funny. Judith, it's a funny book.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's really funny. And so why did you take that tone? You know, what was the reason? It's like serious stuff.
Yeah, one of my mentors, Bruce Shapiro, who's the executive director of the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma, he has watched me teach. And actually I do seminars and workshops for him and his organization. And he said, Judith, just write it the way you talk. And the way I teach is, I think you have to have humor because this stuff is really, really grim. And a lot of it is very, very technical and you lose people. But if you keep them engaged and you you leaven it with jokes and snarks and a bit of sardonic stuff here and there, you're going to keep people's attention. And the thing is to be, this is kind of the way I approach life, which is with gallows humor. If you're dealing with very, very grim situations, one of the best way to gain control over what's scaring you is to make it seem ridiculous. So this is kind of my modus operandi anyway, and it just seemed to work for the book. And what I wanted to do, as you can see, there's this phenomenal cover. I like to work with visual artists. I mean, when I'm out reporting, I like to work with photographers. I just feel like it enhances my reporting when I'm working with somebody who's very visually oriented. It just helps me see things in a different way. And one thing that I wanted with this book was to get a cartoonist to illustrate some of the more absurd parts of things and take it to another level. And I really wanted somebody from the New Yorker. So I just randomly wrote to this woman whose cartoons I liked. Her name is Sharon Levy. She's absolutely brilliant, folks. And Sharon got back to me in about 3 seconds and said, let's do it. And the woman, this cover is so scarily prescient. I think she has superpowers of prophecy, because it's of a woman wearing a mask, watching something attack New York City. And she drew this in November.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So, and it's supposed to be a meteor, but actually looks like a coronavirus. So it's just, I mean, it's just extraordinary how she just kind of, I'll tell you, the woman has superpowers. That's all I can say. And she's very, very funny. And, working with her was such a great collaboration, because I'd say something like, yeah, let's do a picture of the shelter in somebody's basement. Can you put a llama in there? And then she'd come back and the llama would have this perfect droll expression on its face. Or I would say, it's really important to do manicure when you're in a bunker. Can you do a picture of somebody doing their nails in the bunker? And it would come back, and it was just perfect. It really was. She's really, it was wonderful to work with her. I've never met her, by the way.
You've never met her?
No, we've had 2 phone conversations. I think I know what she looks like. Yeah, but we just had this phenomenal email communication where I'd send her one word, like dog in the middle of a demonstration. She'd come back and it was like she went in my head and she went another level. Everybody should all work with cartoonists.
I want to know how you get a manicure in a pandemic. That's what I want to know.
Gotta read the book.
That's what I want to know. So, all right. So, how to drag a body? I see. You got to get what?
You got to do it yourself.
You got to do it yourself. Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, that's going to be your next book, is like how to give yourself a manicure, because
you don't want to hear that from me. You really don't want to hear that from me. No, I have a scar on my foot where I the cuticle cutter went in the wrong place. You don't want that from me. And also what you can't see, because I'm wearing eyebrow pencil, is I sliced off one of my eyebrows trying to tweeze it. I got one of those eyebrow slicers. So I now have to draw in eyebrows, but you can't. Anyway, let's get back to safety.
They don't grow back, do they? Eyebrows don't go back, I heard.
No,
maybe that's
how
they don't.
No,
yeah. Okay.
Coming back. Never coming back.
What I would like to know is, who was the intended audience when you wrote it?
Everybody.
It wasn't just journalists.
All of you who signed in. I wanted it to be people's teenage kids. I wanted it to be their mothers. I wanted it to be emergency workers. I wanted it to be journalists. I wanted it to be my mother. I wanted it literally women, children, men, fathers, grandfathers. I just wanted it to be everybody. And I think that was another reason why I wanted to go for a funny tone, because I think humor, although humor can be very specific, it is a way to bond people. And I felt it would be a way to reach more people.
Well, that is something that you and I have talked about a lot, is gallows humor and using it. Is it okay to use it in a situation, in a time when like people are, not so much now, but you would hear the sirens and everybody was going to the hospitals, and my default is always to be funny, right? And to make jokes, and yours, but there are people who talk about right, but we talk about this with like comedians.
According to book list, the humor in the book is tasteful. So, and that was the thing, like I worked with the editor on, I mean, there were certain times when I went really far and she's like, Judith, it's not appropriate here. Like, this is not going in the book. And I mean, that's that's the wonderful thing. And I want to do a shout out for my editors at Harper Wave and the publisher, Karen Rinaldi. I mean, they really, they got the book, and they also got when bits of it didn't work and made it work. So working with a good editor, particularly when you're dealing with humor and delicate topics, is really critical.
Well, you know, that leads me to, in fact, the title, How to Drag a Body. I mean, who came up with that? Because there are a lot of associations with that, right? There's like,
okay. First of all, I want to do a shout out to Sawyer Alberi, who does medical training for me, who is talk about humor. She's just a phenomenal trainer, and she's a very funny woman. And she has taught me and the other people who take our workshops in how to drag bodies. So I had a section in the first aid section about how to drag a body. It's a very big part of our training. And my working title was Prepped. And the folks
that sounds like someone in an alligator.
Yeah, I know. You like a Lacoste shirt that's pink, and and so the folks at Harper Wave very wisely said, you know, we need to jazz it up a bit. And even my agent was like, Judith, this isn't going to work. It's just like too bland. And then they were having a meeting, and somebody at the meeting said, well, what about How to Drag a Body? And that was it. That was history. That just became the title. And it does definitely provoke a reaction. You know, I've been, it's really interesting seeing how people react to it. I mean, it does leap out at you, whereas Prepped would not.
Well, Prepped, again, it would think it's a different book. It's a different book. Maybe it's How to Survive Wearing an Alligator Shirt. I don't know.
That's not something I could help anybody with.
Yeah.
More of a
well, but you have also, I believe that you have a flak jacket that you want
yes.
to show.
Yes,
you want to show everybody?
Yeah, because I do have a section on Dress for Success.
Yes.
And I was actually going to start out wearing the flak jacket, except I was afraid the Velcro would tear the lace on my cocktail dress, because you have to wear a cocktail dress when you launch a book. Okay, now I'm going to stand up.
Stand up.
Here we go. Okay, this is my wine-colored burgundy flak jacket that I was given in South Africa to cover the first democratic elections where Nelson Mandela was elected president. Now this flak jacket, you're probably thinking to yourself, as I did when I saw it, like, who wears a red flak jacket? Well, I'll be honest with you. I think I'm the only person on the face of the earth that has worn a red flak jacket, and it was not my choice. What happened was my boss had a fairly mischievous sense of humor, or maybe it was malicious and sadistic. I was one of the few women in the office at the time, and so being the only woman, I got the red flak jacket and all the guys got blue. And I was really pissed off, because I thought this is going to make me stand out, and like, who wears red when they drive up to a checkpoint and people are pointing guns? Like, why would you wear red? But it actually ended up being an advantage, because the guys had navy blue and the South African Defense Forces wore blue navy jackets. When I say jackets, I mean flak jackets, like bullet resistant flak, so body armor. So they would like drive up, and then people would shoot at them thinking that they were in the SADF. Whereas me, well, first of all, for those of you that don't know me, I'm about the size of a 14-year-old, or like a 5th grader, more like an 11-year-old. And so you have somebody who looks like an 11-year-old, I was a lot younger then, wearing a red flak jacket, and it looked pretty ridiculous. So it became a conversation starter. People would laugh, and it's like, where did you get that silly thing? And then people want to take pictures of me, and then I'd give them cigarettes, and then we'd take pictures together. And it, you know, and then they forgot to shoot me. So it actually ended up being an advantage. And so my whole section about Dress for Success is, what do you wear that's appropriate, and what don't you wear that's appropriate for various scenarios that could be dangerous and not. Clearly, you're not going to wear stilettos like Melania Trump did when there's a hurricane. That's just one example, but there are plenty more.
She's so smart. Come on, she's really prepared for everything. I mean,
she has nice shoes.
Yeah.
But anyway, but I do talk about these, you know, and I even talk about, I mean, on a more serious note, I do talk about bullet resistant backpacks for kids. because that's actually probably not a very, very good idea for a number of reasons. So the book is, I juxtapose humor and absurdity and examples of things that I experienced in fairly extreme situations with very, very practical advice. Again, that would be one more piece of advice for parents.
Why would that not be a good idea? Why would that not be a good?
Well, kids leave their backpacks in a locker. So like if there's an active shooter in the school, the kids probably are not gonna have it anywhere near them. They also weigh a lot. They weigh a whole lot. And, we're already worried about what kids are doing to their vertebrae in their necks, wearing heavy backpacks just loaded with math and science books. And then you add that on top of it. The other thing about a bullet resistant flak is that it's not bulletproof. So it will only protect you against certain type of things. It's not going to protect you against an AR-15, for instance, which seems to be the weapon of choice. So yeah, but anyway, you got to read the book. I'll go into great detail about that.
Well, you gotta go read the book. What about when we were talking about COVID, right? I mean, and so how do you prepare for that, for this situation? Obviously, we know which is like sweats, so we're cool for that.
Make sure you have a lot of pajamas to hang around with in the house. Yeah. Again, it's the stockpiling question. It's having everything in your house in case there's an emergency, so that you don't have to panic and suddenly rush there and find out there are no wipes. So just, again, the book has a long list of emergency supplies that you should have in your house regardless. And then particularly for those of us that live in areas where natural disasters are an issue, you really, really do need a go-to bag, which is sort of an emergency bag that you would like throw into the car and, run out with. And supplies like an NOAA radio, that's an emergency radio which you can crank up by hand, so you don't need an electricity or a battery source. Forehead headlights. I mean, there's a whole list of things. But, particularly with climatic issues becoming a very, very big problem all over the world, I think one really needs to have those supplies. If you live in an area where there are yearly wildfires, think about what you need in the house in terms of emergency gear, both in the house and in your car. Likewise, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes. And if you have it already in the house, and if you always have, I always have a go-to bag ready to go. And part of that was habit from when I was a foreign correspondent. You get a phone call 3 a.m, like, get on a flight to Burundi. Well, you're already packed because you're always packed. So if you're just kind of always prepared, then when something happens, it's not like, oh my God, I need to refill my antibiotics, because you already have a spare supply of antibiotics for a month because you thought ahead. And if you have copies of all your important papers in a safe place, in case you've got to evacuate, you already have them on you. So you're not like running around the house as the water is rising, looking for your will and looking for your insurance papers, because they're already in a very neat waterproof file.
But a lot of them are also online now anyway, right? Don't a lot of people keep them in their computer? They're all
but not everything is. Right. Not everything is. And it's good to have it all in one place, because let's say you evacuate and you don't have access to very good communications, because communications can go down in a natural disaster. You have your documents on hand with you. So again, and I give a really, really handy checklist in the book, so you don't have to assemble it yourself in the dark. I basically tell you what to do.
But you didn't add anything, right? You didn't have a chance to add anything to the book about COVID or pandemics.
No, because the book was already produced and ready to go. I think it was January or before everything became a crisis. But there's so many parts of the book that are applicable in terms of what kind of emergency stuff you should think about, what you should have in the house. And what's most critical, and this really gets to the gist of the book is about a mindset. If you prepare for emergencies, and if you prepare for the worst case scenario, you're gonna deal with it in a calmer way because you've already thought it through. So all of us should have a communication plan with our emergency contacts already set up. And that applies for COVID, that applies for any other type of emergency. Again, if you equip the house with the type of things that you might need for an emergency, then there's not all this panic preparation. And it's really about just thinking through, how you would react to an extreme situation. Who would you call? Who should you have in your contact list? How do you find the authorities? Where do you go for information? That's a very methodical way of approaching the world. It's almost a philosophy. And so
It's
again,
very Jewish.
that's in the book.
Very Jewish,
It
right?
is any type of emergency. It doesn't just have to be COVID. So the
No.
next time a terrible calamity happens, you will have your checklist there.
Well, it goes to, what mothers always used to say, right? Always have money on you and clean underwear.
And clean underwear. And clean
Right.
underwear.
It's that Jewish mother, you never know what's going to happen. Invariably, it's going to be something bad.
Yeah.
So prepare for it,
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
why not? Yeah.
Yeah, prepare.
So, well, but Judith, we were talking the other day about, in terms of writing the book, what was the hardest chapter? What was among the hardest chapters to write? What were they?
Yeah. Just for those of you who haven't seen the book, there's God, how many chapters are there? I mean, I wrote the damn thing. I don't even remember. I think there are like 11 chapters. Like one is on, shelter, travel, emergency first aid, bombs, protests and shooters, natural disasters, sexual harassment and rape, drinking, online harassment and stalking, electronic security, and emotional resilience. So the two hardest ones, I think, were the sexual harassment, sexual assault chapters, and anything related to online cyber issues. Cyber online is, when I do my trainings, that's the bit where everybody says, could we just flash forward to tomorrow and not do this? It's very abstract, it's very technical. Certainly journalists are not necessarily that adept with technology. Everybody freaks out. It's very mind numbing. So trying to make it funny and interesting was a huge challenge. And I think I wrote something like 8 drafts of those 2 chapters because it's so cerebral, it's so abstract. How do you make it accessible to people when you're giving them a giant data dump of all these different tactics they can take, that they should take to protect themselves digitally and online. And then the sexual harassment and assault chapter also took quite a lot of extra work. Again, my publisher, Karen Rinaldi, is a very, very astute, very, very sensitive reader and editor. And she really went through it with a fine comb because we had to get the tone right for that. That was not a chapter where I could be joking around. Right. It's just too difficult. And particularly because, we want this book to be accessible for women. If you look at most prepper manuals and most books that have to do with prep and survival, they're basically written for men. And so we wanted to make this particularly applicable for women who can't find this information anywhere else. And so that one took a lot of very delicate fine tuning. And thanks to Karen, I think we got there. But that took a lot of work. So those are probably the 2 most difficult ones. Others just wrote themselves because I basically wrote up my lectures. And, or I would just talk to myself and type pretending I was giving a lecture. So, and, so much of the information is here that I really didn't have to do very much research for the book. It was just a matter of getting it down on paper and getting the tone down.
What's the thing that you talk about with, isn't there something with a chicken that you want,
Yeah. Hi, Sawyer Alberry, our medical trainer. There was a colleague who was killed, Tim Hetherington, who was shot in the femoral artery and he bled out. And actually there's a wonderful safety organization called RISK, which trains journalists how to tend to each other if something like that happens when they're on assignment together. And because of that incident, Sawyer has developed a training exercise where you're saving Tim's life and you're clamping his femoral artery and you're stopping the blood. Now, we can't revive Tim and we don't want to cut open a human and, stick your hand in their groin. So what Sawyer does is she brings in chickens and puts things in the cavities that simulate pumping blood. And then you've got to stuff it. And I must say, let's see, I think Sawyer, we've been working together now 11 years or something. My Thanksgiving stuffing is absolutely extraordinary.
I heard it
medical training.
I heard
my
it's to die
Thanksgiving
for.
stuffing technique is really, really excellent. So you see, that's the other thing about this book. You might have better Thanksgivings once you read stuff in it.
Like I hear your stuffing's to die for.
Yeah.
There you go. That was a joke. That was gallows humor. You know,
Yes, guys.
do you think here everybody, you know, is the toilet paper hoarding and the sanitizer and the mask and everything? After we find a vaccine, right? Assuming whenever that is, do you think people are going to, how much of this is going to stick? Or do you think people are going to forget about, you know, all the preparation they have done? Do you think it's going to go out the window?
I don't know. I mean, I think we're probably going to see three strata of people. We're going to see people like my 19-year-old son who will probably, it's like, you know, I don't want to deal with this again. Or maybe not. He's also really, really smart, savvy individual. So maybe he will incorporate some of this. I think people like me who are of a certain demographic, who are immune challenged, I think, believe me, I'm probably going to be wearing a mask for the rest of my life. You know, I mean, I never was a hand washer. That's not going away. Like from now on, I'm going to be like Donald Trump. I'm going to be washing my hands all the time. And then there are probably, and then there's probably people, so there's probably people who are like, okay, I don't want to deal with it ever again. Then there are people like me who will incorporate these habits. And because I'm a safety nut, you know, this is definitely going to be part of my new regime. And then there's probably going to be a middle ground of people who are a little bit more aware, but, you know, we'll kind of loosen up a bit. But I think in terms of what we saw with the stockpiling and the hoarding, I think it might give people pause, and I hope it does, about how you should just always have this stuff in the house. I mean, once lockdown eases, and I know for some parts of the country it already has, just keep those supplies at the same level. Don't run them down. Just keep them up there because, you know, you may need them. Pandemics come in waves. We don't know if another, look, we had MERS, we had SARS, now we have this one. Who knows what's going to come next? Just be prepared and always keep those lentils in the, you know, in the toilet paper and the wipes and the Clorox and everything. Just always have enough in the basement or wherever, you know, your bathroom, wherever. That's my advice. I mean, take it or leave it.
But buy it regardless. We talked the other day about what you miss most about that life, right? Because you were a foreign correspondent. You were the bureau chief for the Christian Science Monitor, right?
Yeah, in Africa and in Moscow, which covered CIS, all the former Soviet Union. Yeah. And before that, I was with Reuters for 11 years. So all over the world, you know, all over the place. And then subsequently, working on magazine pieces and my last books, you know, I've reported in Asia and the Balkans and whatnot. What I miss is the sense that my job is actually important. I mean, it really, doing that type of work really gives you a sense of mission. It's not just a vocation. There's a sense that you're actually doing something important for society. Now, whether any of my stories actually change anything in the world, I really can't tell you for sure, but I live in the illusionary world that really made an impact. That's one, that the work was important. The other thing is you develop incredibly strong bonds with people. They're almost like family. And that's, you know, I know I have friends that work in emergency medicine and the same thing happens there. And I think people who work in extreme situations do develop very, very strong bonds. The third thing is I think it's very humbling if you work in places of war or where people are living in extraordinarily dire emergencies. It really gives you a greater appreciation for what you have. And it puts things in perspective. We live a pretty positive life in the States. And even with this pandemic, our lives are pretty cozy. You know, we're not in a basement cowering with no water or electricity in Syria being bombed. You know, we have been sheltering in place with relative comfort. And so I think when you've been living in extreme situations and immersed in them, I think it does give you an appreciation for what we do have here, which we tend to take for granted.
Right. No, I think that's right. Well, would you want your son to go off and be a war correspondent?
No, Anton, if you're listening, no.
He's forbidden.
but I mean, but if he does, that's fine. He wants to be a a human rights lawyer, so he's probably going to end up in these places anyway.
Oh, I want to do that too. Maybe he and I can go to law school
Yeah.
together.
Sure. But read the book first. Read the book first so you know what you're doing. Don't do anything stupid like I did.
If there was one takeaway, and I think I know what you're going to say, but if there was one takeaway from the book that you want people to get, what would it be?
If you plan for the worst case scenario, like I think most of us are in denial. We don't want to think what could be the worst possible thing that could ever happen to you. If you allow yourself to go there mentally, then analyze, is that really likely or not? And then come up with a plan to mitigate it. You're actually going to feel a greater sense of control. Whereas the unknown, kind of like this generalized anxiety, is going to make you feel worse. But if you actually think, okay, let's just say this. Okay, we'll give you an example. So what's my worst case scenario? That I get COVID and I'm alone in the hospital and I can't, my family can't visit me and I can't communicate because there's like a tube stuck in me. So, okay, that's probably my worst scenario at the moment, or that my son gets sick. That's an even worse scenario. So what can I do to mitigate that? Well, I can do all the things that we're all doing, the mask, the hand washing, not leaving the house that much, not letting people into the house who aren't clean. Abby's allowed in, but not very many people. And we make her, wash and everything and stand away from us. So again, that's just one tiny little example of how you would go about doing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We have some questions from our friends. So I'm going to read with this lockdown. This is from Justin Bailey.
Hi, Justin. Hi.
With this lockdown, we see a lot of advice from astronauts and those types of people. But isn't the situation closer to being a prisoner or being kidnapped? So what advice and safety tips are most relevant to this particular period?
That's a really interesting question. Hostages that I've spoken to who have emerged, when you speak to them and you ask them how did they cope best, they said routines were very important and to try to get some form of control over their environment. A good friend of mine, I don't know if she's listening in right now, she was taken hostage and in Africa, and she would push back at her captors. It's like, I don't like the spaghetti, it's not cooked enough, or like, I want some shampoo for my hair. So, and she would keep track of the hours of the day by the sound of the mosque outside, and she would try to build some form of a routine. And I think, particularly for people who aren't freelancers and they're not used to working at home, routines have been absolutely critical because a routine gives you a sense of normality and it gives you structure to the day. So as you're getting through the day, you're thinking, okay, it's 5 o'clock, I can have my cocktail now. But if you have set routines, your life seems more ordinary. And it also helps you get to the end of the day. So I think that's one thing.
Explain to me how that would work. Why would the person who is keeping you prisoner, you're complaining about the spaghetti, why wouldn't they just say, you know what, I'm sick of you?
Well, they could. In her case, they wanted to keep her alive because they won the ransom.
Okay.
Yeah, and usually they don't want you to die. When they want you to die, they'll kill you, but they don't want you to starve yourself because then they can't get the money that they're seeking. That's often, there are different types of hostages, but that's like one example. Okay. So I think routines are really, really critical. And I think the other thing, which is, I would say it's more like being a hostage than a prisoner, because we can go outside. We have more control than a prisoner. A prisoner can't leave prison. We can go outside, we can put on our gloves and our masks and we can go to the park and we can stand far from people. So we're not being held captive. We have decided ourselves, which already gives us a sense of control. We have decided that we will stay in the house, but nobody's forcing us to. So I think that's very different.
Not here, but in other countries they are, or they were.
Yeah, that's true. Some friends of mine in Colombia were saying like the army was patrolling the street and there were drones and helicopters going overhead. But yes, but let's just talk about the United States. We're not being held prisoner here. We may feel captive, but we're captive out of choice. And I think the thing to emphasize, and again, this is so important with hostages, anything that you can do that asserts some control over your environment will make you feel better. And again, that's why the whole planning question is so critical, because planning gives you a sense of control. You are taking action. You're scared of something, you are taking action to confront it. And that's, that gives you a sense of control.
Like everyone in California, right, who has the earthquake's supposed to have the earthquake kits under their beds, right?
Yeah, they ought to.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to take some more questions from our friends in the audience. This is something from Serena, and she said, Serena Rohr, hello. What is your, I think it's for you, what's your favorite way to de-stress? And can baking help with stress?
Oh, baking helps with a lot of people. It doesn't help with me, just because I don't know how to bake and we have a really crappy oven.
You could learn.
Cooking's good. You've got to have exercise. Exercise is critical. And we really deal with that a lot. Like when we're journalists in the field and we're dealing with very stressful situations. I knew one guy who was like climbing the outside of his hotel, like the windows, using it as like a climbing gym. If you do yoga, aerobic activity is good. Every day I go out for an hour and I go outside and I run or I walk really, really briskly. You've got to get exercise. It's a great way to de-stress. Eating properly, getting enough sleep. Again, if you have a sleep schedule, you're more likely to sleep well. You've got to get enough sleep. That's another thing. And human company. I think also animal company, if you've got that. But human company, you know, what studies have been, according to psychological studies, of what helps people deal the most with, let's say, PTSD, it's social connection. If you've got social connection and a supportive group of people that you can turn to, regular social connection, you know, the way everybody's been doing Zoom cocktails, perfect. That's like your survival instinct is kicking in. You want to have Zoom cocktails all the time with a group of friends. That is a perfect thing to do to de-stress. Writing in a journal, a lot of people do that. I don't, but you know, think about how many war correspondents have written memoirs. And I think it's because this stuff is going on. They want to have a narrative with a beginning, a middle, and then most importantly, an end.
Right.
And journaling is very good for some people. I love cooking. Just makes me, I get at my anger by cutting up pieces of meat.
You like reach inside the chickens. But then what about people who live alone, right? A lot of people live alone. And so they can't, when they
exercise, you can still cook, you can still have the social connection via Zoom or whatever. I mean, you live alone. Yeah, we've been on Zoom.
But I like to be alone. I mean, I'm good being, you know, I mean, I don't want to even have a Zoom cocktail, but you know, only with you.
I think also, like, even though I'm a journalist and I teach journalism, like the news really stresses me out. So I have just pretty much cut out my news consumption.
Yeah.
And my husband was telling me the other day about some guy that got shot running. And I was like, what? Can, you know, like, no, I mean, I just was so out of it with news that I hadn't even, you know, and I just find it's one of my coping mechanisms. I read the news like, you know, once every 3 days now, you know. If I need to hear anything, somebody in the family will tell me. That's one thing. And I'm watching a ton of funny videos. It's just, I'm working my way through Curb Your Enthusiasm. And it's, you know, I'm a little bit upset because I'm midway through season 8. So
no.
But I think humor is, for me, it's a detoxifying way to deal with stress. And you can do that when you're alone. You can laugh out loud when you're alone. Nobody's going to hear you.
One other question from Amy Golden. She said, hi, Amy. I wonder if different emergencies call for different prep.
Oh, totally. And that's why you have to buy the book.
No, she's going to. She said, I guess I will read this in the book. So she's going to get the book. Thanks, Amy. But yeah.
I mean, what you do for a hurricane, you don't do for, you know, wildfires. What you do for wildfires, you don't do for Ebola. What you do for Ebola, you don't do with COVID-19. Yeah, different emergencies deal with different types of situations. But I think there are some certain basic supplies one should have in the house. And I think there's certain basic skills. One of those skills, again, you know, Sawyer does this in our medical training, but there's a group called Stop the Bleed. It's a national movement, and they offer free training for people who learn how to stop others from bleeding out. It could be at a car accident, or it could be at a mass shooting. But I think we should all know how to do that, because it's the first minutes after a shooting or a car accident could be a critical time to save someone's life. So there's certain skills that I think we as a base we need, and that's in the chapter, the basics. And then from there, you pan out and you get more specific according to your particular crisis.
Somebody, I had a very bad joke that came into my head when you talked about stop the bleed. So I just thought,
Tampax.
For menstruation, yeah. But anyway.
Nose bleeding, stick it up there.
Or nose bleeding. See, that's where my head goes. Yeah, right. Okay. So
and related, condoms are really useful for things. Like, did you know, like if you're at a barbecue, I mean, they smell really bad, but they're very, very, well, they smell bad when they're
cooked?
Yeah, when you light them, but they're great fire starters. You can make water balloons and, throw them at somebody who's attacking you. You can store things in them. They're waterproof. I mean, you can use them in place of gloves in case you've got to pick up something in the street here and you don't have your handy gloves with you. There's a lot you can do with household items. They have that don't relate to their original purposes.
Right. I once lit a condom on fire totally for fun, and it ended up falling on my leg, and I now have a scar. So anyway.
It smells really bad when it burns, doesn't it?
Don't do that at home. Yeah. Well, this is a very important question from Serena Rohr, and she wants to know about your curls and how did you tame them in a war zone?
I look like disgusting. And what I would do, because also you sometimes don't shower or bathe, you don't wash for 3 weeks. You wear a lot of hats, you cover up your head, or use alcohol. You wash your hair with alcohol if there's no water. You take the volume.
See, I don't know how to turn that off. I'm sorry. Okay.
It's good. It sounds cheerful. It sounds festive.
It sounds cheerful.
Yeah.
Here's a question from somebody else, which from Wendy Paris.
Hi, Wendy.
She wants to know about the psychological advice. So what she said is about now, especially, a lot of what people are struggling with seems to be the emotional struggle of being home and having their normal routine disrupted.
Yeah. Well, some of the stuff that I outlined before are tactics and tools that you would use to build up resilience. Again, social contact, routines, exercise, eating well, getting enough sleep, making sure you're on a sleep schedule, journaling, spirituality helps some people, distraction with humor, really anything that gives you pleasure, focusing on that and trying to see an opportunity in this crazy situation. There are silver linings. They may be very slim and they be quite minuscule, but get a microscope and look for them and just try to focus on that. At the end of the day, just try to reflect on one thing that is good during the day or something. I know this sounds very, very corny, but it really take one day at a time. That really is absolutely critical when you're going through something which seems endless. Because if we start projecting into the future, first of all, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Like my worst case scenario, I'm not going to ever get work again. My university is going to get rid of all the ancillary professors. My kid's never going to go to graduate school because there won't be graduate schools. He's never going to get a job in this economy. There's no point in my thinking about it because it may not happen. So, but if I just think about today, like when I get off the Zoom, we're going to get really drunk and roast a chicken. That seems kind of pleasant. I'm kind of looking forward to that chicken.
Not for the chicken.
Yeah.
Not for the chicken. No, I have found it. I've enjoyed this time. I mean, that sounds crazy, but I like the slowing down. I like, and you and I have talked about this. You like being with your family and cooking and spending the time together.
They don't like being with me, but I love being with them.
Well, yeah, we'll talk about that offline. But yeah, I mean, you forbade your son from coming over, right, to hang out here. He's got to be home with you. So I mean, it's nice. It's not. I mean, a lot of people feel like this gave them the time to calm down, relax, and get off the, and just have some time to breathe.
Yeah.
So
and I think you've got to focus on that, and you've got to focus on what you can control and what you can't. And unfortunately, we can't control the uncertainty. We can't control the death around us. We can't control the sirens that we hear. We can't control the implosion of the economy. But what we can control is how we look at things. look, I'm not the most Zen person in the world, as anybody who knows me attests to that. But I think if you can look at what you can control during the course of one day at a time and reflect on something positive that is coming out of this, it makes it easier to cope with. I mean, without a doubt, it's a difficult situation to cope with, but that would be my advice to people, to try to reflect on it and to just accept that you can't control this thing. I think as soon as you accept you can't control it, it makes it easier to deal with it.
Well,
and to not project too much.
It's forcing us really to live in the present, right?
Yeah.
That it is.
I've never done. I've always lived in the past or the future. I've never lived in the present.
Exactly.
I don't like it in a weird way.
No, a lot of people do. But in the meantime, we have time, speaking of present, we have time, because I am looking ahead, we have time for 2 more questions. So here we go. How about, from Gabe Boyers, what do you think about
Gabe, I knew his name. No, Gabe, of course I knew his name was Armin Arbery. I knew that. I was being slightly sardonic here.
That wasn't the question I was thinking about.
No, he's got a question here on the
What do you think about buying a gun?
What's that?
What do you think about buying a gun?
Okay, journalists cannot, from an ethical and professional point of view, under the Geneva Conventions, if we start carrying guns, they are actually combatants, and we're taking sides. We don't.
Sorry, I don't know why that happened.
Oh, there we go. So as journalists, we should not be carrying guns. Whether a ordinary citizen wants to carry a gun, I cannot tell people whether or not to do that. That's your decision. I don't think people should be walking around with AR-15s. I don't think anybody should be walking around with combat quality arms, for ordinary use in America. But again, if you want to carry a gun, it's your business and that's your decision. But if you were a journalist, you should not be carrying it when you're working. What we did as journalists is we would hire people to protect us. In Somalia, they were called technicos, technicians. And I have been guarded by soldiers. I have been guarded by other people, but I myself will not touch the weapon.
You have to be careful that they don't turn on you, right? I mean, you have to seriously vet.
Yeah, I mean, as I point out, I'm like the size of an 11-year-old person. You sneeze, I'll fall to the ground. The other thing is that I don't have proficiency with a weapon. So there is that too, but there's the ethical, professional standard that we have in our industry, which is we are not armed, because that makes us combatants.
Right. Okay, last question.
Okay.
From Guy Wiggins.
Hi, Guy.
Curious if there were any novels or philosophers, say the Stoics, like Seneca, that you recommend reading. Maybe The Plague by Camus.
Yeah, The Plague disturbs me. I mean, to me, reading The Plague right now is like watching a zombie movie. It was funny, when I was at the writer's residency, a lot of people were sort of binging up there on disaster movies. And to me, what I'm doing right now is distracting myself with comedy and not reading anything that at all relates to what we're going through right now. So I'm looking for total escapism. But if you find philosophy something that gives you guidance during this time, then by all means turn to it. But I just can't face it at the moment. As a matter of fact, I'm having trouble reading anything other than newspapers at the moment.
There's this interesting dance that we have to do between living in denial and actually knowing what's going on, right? Yeah. I mean, that's because we have to protect ourselves, but we can't hear all the time because
right.
We'll go,
right.
Crazy.
And I mean, for my own mental preservation, I've just been putting on very, very big filters.
And I see Nadine pop up like Alice from the Brady Bunch. Hello.
Hi. And Nadine, who I want to thank for organizing this, and Rose Kurtunen also. I mean, I'm very, very grateful to the club for organizing this event, and to the rest of you who've shown up. Thank you for taking interest, and it's lovely to see your names. I'm looking at the chat here, and it's lovely seeing all these beloved names pop up. So